Hello and welcome. I'm being interviewed and interviewing Henry. We're having a good two-way dialogue conversation. Henry, why don't you tell me something about your disability?
Okay, I was born with congenital cataracts. It affects your eyes, so they remove the cataracts. So I have no lenses in my eye, which means your focal length is quite fixed. Therefore, I have always had glasses. But I was very lucky. I had a very good pioneering eye doctor. So I had my eye surgery started between 6 months and then 3 years old. So I've always been actually quite lucky that I can probably see better than I might have, particularly reading. So I'm actually classified severely sight impaired, and I also have a hearing difficulty after an operation in my ear.
Goodness, well that's quite something. My own conditions are twofold. Firstly, I have epilepsy, although God willing, that may well be over because I've actually not had a seizure for 27 days now, which for me is highly unusual because usually I have what was called a mild form of epilepsy, and it was associated with another condition, interictal psychosis. Psychosis ultimately can mean things like schizophrenia, but in my case, it's just muddled thinking and disorganized thoughts, which I've just, again, had to have God's help, practitioners' support, friends and family behind me in dealing with and recognizing it alongside the epilepsy to do some good voluntary work. And I know, Henry, that that's the case for you as well. Do you want to say something first about your work that you do 9 to 5?
Okay, for some time I've worked in a primary school. So I did train on a special government program for disabled people to bring their basically lived experience into education. So I support children with quite complex needs. So I work in a school with a autism base. So we have 25 autistic children, 500 children in the mainstream. I'm actually supporting a child with sight difficulties and delayed learning at the moment. So that's sort of a new avenue for me. In the past, I've been co-opted into doing quite a lot of general duties, even though I've been quite an experienced, I suppose, specialist teaching assistant, because we've had funding problems. And now with COVID, we just have to fill in. So yes, so I work in primary school, and I've been in the same school for 16 years now.
Well, that's wonderful. Okay, so I mean, I currently am not working, and that has been related in the past to my interictal psychosis. I wasn't diagnosed with it for some time and had to try and understand why people were saying, "Here's a compromise agreement. What is wrong?" And not understanding that my disorganized thinking was hindering my ability to work. But one thing that I have been very clear on wanting to do subsequently is try and not have that affect my ability and my thinking towards healthcare professionals that may have not seen some evidence for being diagnosed. How have you found that the role of health professionals in your treatment of cataracts and more generally?
I think at the moment there have been real difficulties with people getting primary care. I think for disabled people particularly, I've been on the RNIB Connect group. We had a special group, customer group, talking about the difficulties during COVID. And getting primary care and taking the people's doctors away from them, I think has been a real issue, because obviously the doctors know them. And I think for disabled people, that's been quite isolating, on top of the kind of isolation they've had to deal with already, actually.
I have certainly experienced in the conversations that I've had with people like myself with epilepsy, there is a certain stigma as well. Do tell us more about exactly what your charitable causes are and how you work to try and help people.
School has been quite tough for me, personally, because of the floaters, and secondly, because of sort of cuts and having to do a lot more general duties running around the classroom, which for my eyesight hasn't been the best working environment. So I decided to do some networking. So I started networking through some old contacts with Blind in Business, who are a charity in the city, who do a brilliant job for recruiting blind people through university and then on to jobs if they want to be a lawyer or go into finance. I got involved with the Pocklington Trust, who are based at the British Medical Association. And I just joined that when they started a working age forum, because like autistic people, blind people or severely vision impaired people, only 40% of them are in the workforce. So they have actually set up their forum to make sure blind people can feel more confident about applying for work and learning from each other. So it's very much a people-centered approach. So from that, I got on to the Union one, which is now called the National Education Union Disability Connect Group in London. And I'm also a trustee of Churches Together in Clapham, which is to do with the social projects in Clapham, because I've got experience there. So I suppose the answer is, James, I've been looking at different avenues because school was getting tougher and it's quite physical. And I was thinking, well, there may be a point at some point that I have to change jobs. And I think the Pocklington Trust for me are still the most encouraging one. But as I said, I like working with people. I don't really like working on my own. So I'm thinking about if I change from school, I would go and do psychology. And I'd like to do sort of more therapy-based group therapy work for people losing their eyesight. I'm not sure if I want to do one-to-one counselling because I like being with people. So it's more because I had to change is why I'm getting involved in charities.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I myself at one point was considering epilepsy changes to my diet with ketogenic diet, but more especially surgery. I literally stuck 40 knitting needles in my skull to try and locate where my epilepsy was coming from, but unfortunately they couldn't pinpoint it. Do you want to say something a little bit more about how you're working with government within the voluntary work that you're doing, Henry?
I was kind of suggested I apply for something called the London Member Stakeholders of the Disability Unit, which is reporting to the Commons MP Committee on Disability. The idea is to basically question some of the issues happening at the Department of Work and Pensions and to prepare some evidence for the Green Paper on Disability. So it's very wide ranging. So it's very difficult, I would say, at the moment for me to say what I'm actually doing. I made a contribution by sending some information about barriers to teaching for disabled people, but that didn't actually fit in with that week. So we talked about transport, we talked about difficulties with Department of Work and Pensions, you know, as anybody might know, looking at the disability rights website at the moment, there's so many issues and so many people talking to government, explaining the problems. You know, we're not really hearing a voice from the government about disability at the moment. So I'd love to say that we're doing great things and we've got a real direction, but I don't think that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I also recognise that government perhaps isn't listening as strongly as it might. So I'm actually doing some work with Disability Labour. I'm a Labour Party member, and it's an affiliated society within the Labour Party, and it's got a good agenda to try and support the rights of those with disabilities and develop policy thinking within government as well. Do say a little bit more about where you feel you can make a contribution going forward.
Well, I'm certainly thinking of setting up a blog to start off with, and we'll see where that goes. So as we look at education at the moment, there's something called good quality teaching. So a lot of special needs strategies have been brought into good quality teaching, whereas we used to have some special needs strategies for individual children. And the reason why this has changed is because we've had cases, you know, particularly the social care cases that come through, where people haven't been treated as disabled. So how do we deal with this? Well, I think where I stand on this is that we need to teach disabled people where they are in the support system. So if we're talking about self-actualization, which is so keen on for this government, particularly with young children, to become as competent as possible at a young age. Really, if you think about it, we have an evidence-based system. Well, you know, we use technology now. we hear about the voice of disabled people is more, we have to be more sensitive to their voice and their feelings, and obviously that's really important. But how do we actually create a model that fits all these things in, that makes it understandable? At the moment we have a model that's so wide that if somebody says, where am I? So the next question is, if I apply for PIP or access to work, I need to know where I am, what I need. I need to have all my relevant documents in place. I need to know the names and dates of my operations. And, so we need to be in the support system. I think particularly in this COVID time, we need to think, I don't want support, I may not need it, but I think we need to know how it works and be in it. So that's another reason that when you fill out all these documents for your mobility car or PIP, or if you're losing your job and you have to claim for disability living allowance or something, you're in a situation where you need everything in front of you.
I did want to ask you about the whole issue of independence. How do we improve the independence of those with disabilities? It's a fundamental question, but needs asking and answering as much as possible.
I think we need to know where we are in the support system ourselves. I think we need induction into jobs, which include not just technical equipment to do the job, but also an understanding of workload. So that was my real problem when I went into teaching. A lot of what's happening at the moment is the money is going to the stakeholders. So it's going to the mobility, people who organise the mobility cars and the insurance companies. It's a very efficient system, when you apply for training, thousands of pounds go to the trainer. It's very, very rigid, and at the moment it is not reactive. So if somebody suddenly needs transport to work, otherwise they're going to, because they have to travel with a lung condition on a tube, it's all about losing your job and claiming statutory sick pay. It's not about how do you keep your job, which it should be about how you keep your job. How are we going to induct you, and when are you happy? And if you're happy with your job, sign off for support. And also, there's no learning, so nobody comes in to say, how is your new computer system which can talk to you, and you can use control keys for blind people. How is that working? So if I'm not writing a diary or sending my information back to the assessors, then how do they ever know how to improve for somebody else?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. I myself have had the issue of middlemen. It's something that in the epilepsy world, Epilepsy Society is putting together quite a successful campaign on medication and the role of the supply chain, and trying to improve the lives of those with disabilities, such as those with epilepsy. Epilepsy is defined within the Equalities Act as quite rightly a disability. What, Henry, are we able to do deep into the heart of government? I know that there's something with the Cabinet Office that you've been involved with.
Yeah, well, that's the Office for Disability now called. And then the idea of that is to be, it's responsible to Commons Committee on Disability. So it should have some weight, really, particularly at the time when we're drawing up a disabled bill. So the person running that is called Dr. Ruth Owen, and she is the head of WizKids, which is a good charity. And I suppose, I think one of the key things that we're not getting right with disabled people is their adaptability, because they have to adapt to manage their disability. And I think another key thing is that we forget that disabled people often care for other people. So, and I think that's this COVID time has been such a case. So I think, people who are blind have children, people, with your condition have to, you're caring for your mum. There are issues that we don't think that disabled people are involved in.